My name is Chisom, and I want to tell you something before this story even begins. I was not a weak woman. I was not the kind of wife who ignored signs or cried herself to sleep while pretending everything was fine. I was the kind of woman who built a home with her bare hands, raised 2 children with fierce love, and stood by her husband through job losses, failed businesses, and family drama that would have broken most marriages. I was loyal. I was present. I was everything a wife was supposed to be. And still, it was not enough. But this story is not about me being a victim. This story is about what happens when the 2 people you trust most in this world decide behind your back that your love, your loyalty, your entire life is something they can use and discard like it means nothing. If you are new here, please subscribe before we go further. Because this story, I promise you, is going to change the way you look at the people closest to you. Let us begin. It started on a Tuesday. A regular, unremarkable Tuesday morning in Lagos. Richard had his suitcase packed by the bedroom door before I even woke up. He was always an early riser, one of the things I used to love about him. By the time I came downstairs, he was already in the kitchen, drinking his tea, looking calm and pressed and ready for the world. He said, "I told you last week, Abuja, client meeting, 2 nights, maybe 3. I nodded. I did not question it. Richard traveled for work often. He was a senior project consultant for an oil servicing firm, and his clients were scattered across the country. Abuja, Port Harcourt, Warri. The trips were routine. The suitcase by the door was routine. The goodbye kiss on my forehead was routine. What was not routine, what I did not know yet, was that this particular trip had nothing to do with any client. There was no meeting in Abuja. There was no flight to the north. There was instead a hotel reservation in Lagos, 20 minutes from our house. I did not know this yet. I kissed my husband goodbye, watched him wheel his suitcase to the car Benson had already brought around, and went back inside to make breakfast for the children. Everything felt normal. Everything felt fine. That is the cruelest thing about betrayal. It does not announce itself. It arrives wearing the face of an ordinary Tuesday. Now let me tell you about Benson. Benson had been our driver for 6 years. He came to us recommended by my colleague at work, a quiet, dependable man from Edo State who showed up on time, never complained, and had a way of blending into the background so completely that most people forgot he was there. He drove the children to school, he drove me to the market, he drove Richard to the airport when there were actual flights to catch. He was part of the furniture of our lives, the way loyal staff sometimes become, invisible, steady, always present. Benson was not the kind of man who gossiped. He was not the kind of man who stirred trouble. In 6 years, I had never heard him say an unkind word about anyone in our household. He was respectful to Richard, he was protective of the children, he was deferential to me in the way that good staff often are, not out of fear, but out of genuine care. What I did not know about Benson, what I would only learn much later, was that he had been carrying a secret for 3 months. 3 months. He had seen something. He had filed it away in that quiet, careful mind of his, and he had spent 3 months arguing with himself about whether it was his place to say anything at all. 3 months of silence. 3 months of watching me laugh and cook and live in a house built on a lie. We will come back to Benson, but first, let me tell you about Sandra. Sandra was my younger sister by 4 years. She was the beautiful one. Everyone said so, and she knew it, wore it like armor. Where I was steady and practical, Sandra was bright and chaotic. Where I worked hard and saved money and built things slowly, Sandra moved through life looking for shortcuts, looking for the fastest route from where she was to where she felt she deserved to be. She had always been this way. Growing up, Sandra had a gift for wanting what other people had. Not in a small, quiet way, in a loud, consuming, restless way. If a classmate got new shoes, Sandra needed new shoes. If a neighbor got a boyfriend, Sandra needed to know he was interested in her too. It was not malice exactly. It was more like a hunger she couldn't control, a need to be chosen, to be first, to have the best of everything. I had loved her anyway. She was my sister, blood. I had overlooked the envy and the small cruelties and the ways she sometimes undercut me with people we both knew. I had told myself this was just Sandra, dramatic, insecure, a little difficult, but fundamentally harmless. I was wrong about the harmless part. Sandra had been spending more time at our house in the months leading up to that Tuesday. I had noticed vaguely that she and Richard seemed to get along better than they used to. They laughed at each other's jokes, they texted, which I knew because she had mentioned something once about a show Richard had recommended to her. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? He was my husband, she was my sister. The triangle of trust between us felt completely solid. It was not. It had been rotting from the inside for a long time. The day everything changed, really changed, not just trembled, was Thursday. Richard had been gone since Tuesday morning. He had called me Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, Wednesday night. Brief calls. He sounded tired, distracted, the way he always sounded when he was traveling for work. He mentioned traffic on the way to a meeting. He asked about the children. He said he would try to be back by Friday. On Thursday morning, I sent Benson to pick up my sister from her flat in Lagos. Sandra and I had plans, a late lunch, some shopping, the kind of easy sister afternoon we hadn't had in a while. Benson left at noon to get her. He came back alone. I was upstairs when I heard the car pulling. I came down expecting Sandra's voice, expecting the sound of her heels on the marble floor, expecting the cloud of her perfume that always arrived before she did. Instead, there was just Benson, standing in the entrance hall, his cap in his hands, not meeting my eyes. "She's not at her flat, Ma. I waited, I called the number you gave me, no answer." I frowned. I called Sandra myself. It rang out. I sent a message, no reply. I assumed she had forgotten. Sandra was unreliable that way. She would make plans and then get distracted by something shinier. I was mildly irritated, but not alarmed. I told Benson we would reschedule, thanked him, and went back upstairs. He did not move immediately. I noticed that. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, his cap still turning in his hands, something sitting behind his eyes that he was not saying. "Is there something else?" I asked. He looked at me. Then he looked away. "No, Ma. I'm sorry, Ma." He went back to the car. I did not think about that moment again until everything else came crashing down.
Richard came home Friday evening, as promised. He looked rested, more rested than a man who had spent 3 days in client meetings had any right to look. His suitcase was in the boot of the car. He smelled of a soap I did not recognize. He kissed me on the cheek, played with the children for 20 minutes, and then said he needed to rest because the trip had been exhausting. He slept through dinner. I sat at the table with our 2 children, eating jollof rice I had cooked with care, and told myself the uneasy feeling crawling across my chest was nothing. Tiredness, paranoia, the kind of anxiety women develop when they watch too many cautionary tales. Later that night, his phone buzzed on the bedside table. He was already asleep. I did not touch it. I had never been the kind of wife who went through her husband's phone. I considered it a violation of trust, something insecure women did, something I had always told myself I would never need to do. The phone buzzed again and again. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I picked it up. The screen was locked, but the notification preview was visible, sitting right there in the dark, glowing. It said, "I miss you already. Today was everything." The number was unsaved, but something about the way the sentence was written, the casual intimacy of it, the particular cadence, made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I put the phone down. I did not sleep. Subscribe right now if you have not already, because what I am about to tell you, what Benson finally said 3 days after that Friday, is the kind of thing that will stay with you long after this video ends. It was Monday morning. Richard had already left for the office. The children were at school. I was in the kitchen when Benson came to the back door, which he never did. He always waited by the car. He always waited to be summoned. Coming to the back door, coming to find me directly, was so unlike him that I immediately knew something was wrong. He stood at the threshold. He had that same look from Thursday, something heavy sitting behind his eyes, something he had been carrying for too long. "Sit down, Benson," I said, because suddenly I needed him to sit down. I needed whatever he was about to say to come from a place of stillness, not urgency. He sat. And then he told me. He had seen Richard 3 weeks ago. Not in Abuja, not in Port Harcourt, right here in Lagos. On a previous trip, the one 2 Saturdays ago, the one Richard said was a one-night turnaround to meet a client in Victoria Island, Benson had been running an errand that afternoon. He needed a part for the car from a mechanic in Ikoyi, a route that took him past the Wheatbaker Hotel on Mutalama Mohammed Way. He saw Richard's car. He recognized it immediately, a silver Toyota Land Cruiser, the personalized plate we had chosen together years ago. It was parked in the hotel lot. Benson told himself it was probably a meeting. Hotel lobbies were common venues for business meetings in Lagos. He drove past. He did not stop. But then he saw them walking in, Richard and Sandra, side by side. Sandra in a yellow dress Benson recognized because he had picked her up in it once, months ago, when I had sent him to collect her for a family gathering. Richard with his hand on the small of her back. Not a brother-in-law's hand, not a polite, formal hand, a hand that knew where it belonged. Benson pulled over. He sat in the car for a long time. He watched them disappear through the hotel entrance. He sat there until he could not sit there anymore. He had spent 3 weeks deciding whether to tell me. 3 weeks. I want you to understand what those 3 weeks felt like inside that man. He was not cowardly, or at least not only that. He was genuinely terrified. He liked his job. He had a family to feed. He knew that speaking could cost him everything. He also knew that staying silent was slowly eating him alive. He told me later that he had not slept properly since that afternoon, that he had rehearsed this conversation in his head so many times that it had started to feel like a wound he kept pressing. He chose to speak. I sat across from him in my kitchen, in my house, in the life I had built, and I listened to every word. And when he finished, I did not cry, I did not shout. I sat very still and I said, "Thank you, Benson." He nodded. He looked relieved and destroyed at the same time. "Tell no one else," I said. "Yes, ma." "Not anyone, not even your wife." "Yes, ma." He went back outside. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time.
Here's what most people would have done at that point. Most people would have called their husband immediately, screamed, confronted, broken things, called their sister and poured fire down the phone. Most people would have let the rage lead. I did not do that. What I did instead was think. Because something Benson said was sitting in my chest like a stone, and it was not the thing I expected to hurt the most. It was not even the hotel. It was not the yellow dress. It was the timeline. 3 weeks ago. Benson had seen them 3 weeks ago, which meant this had been going on before that. How long before? How many trips? How many lies? How many times had I kissed Richard goodbye at the door and watched him wheel his suitcase to the car, completely oblivious, while he was going 20 minutes down the road to be with my sister? And Sandra who had been coming to my house, eating my food, playing with my children, hugging me like a sister should. How many times had she looked me in the eye while this was going on? I needed answers before I needed a confrontation. So I did something I had never done before in my marriage. I called Richard's office. Not his mobile, his office. I asked to speak to his PA, a young woman named Titi who had always been pleasant to me at company events. I told her I was trying to confirm which hotel Richard had stayed at on his last Abuja trip because I needed the receipt for a family tax document. There was a pause. Then Titi said, very carefully, "Ma, I'm not sure which Abuja trip you mean. Mr. Richard has not traveled to Abuja in the last 2 months. His last trip was to Port Harcourt in March." March. It was now May. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes, ma. I booked all his travel. He has not been to Abuja since March." I thanked her. I ended the call. Not one trip. Not one lie. All of it. Every single travel story for the past 2 months had been fabricated. The calls from hotel rooms, the tired voice, the mentions of client names and traffic and flight delays, all of it constructed. All of it designed to keep me exactly where I was, trusting, present, completely blind. I called Auntie Ngozi that afternoon. Auntie Ngozi was not blood aunt. She was my mother's closest friend, a woman who had known me since I was a child, who had been at my wedding, who had held my hand when I lost my first pregnancy before the children came. She was 62 years old, sharp as a blade, and she did not believe in softening truth for comfort. I told her everything, sitting in my car in the compound of the house I shared with my husband, engine off, voice low. Everything Benson had told me, everything Titi had confirmed, all of it. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Chisom, before you do anything, I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Your mother,
she said, slowly. Call your mother before you do anything else. Call your mother and ask her directly. Has she noticed anything between Richard and Sandra? Why? I asked. Auntie Ngozi, what do you know? Another silence, longer this time. I don't know anything for certain, but there was something your mother said to me maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Something small. I did not think much of it at the time, but now, she stopped. Just call your mother, Chisom. Ask. I called my mother. Mama Chisom lived in Enugu. She was 70 years old, quiet in the way that some women become quiet after they have survived too many things. She had lost my father 10 years ago, raised 2 daughters, mostly alone, watched me build a successful life, and watched Sandra stumble through several failed ones. She loved us both, fiercely and differently. She answered on the second ring. I did not go around it. I told her what I knew, what Benson had seen, what Titi had confirmed, all of it. The silence that followed was different from Auntie Ngozi's silence. This silence was not surprise, it was recognition. It was the sound of something a person has been dreading, finally arriving. Mama, I said, did you know? I did not know, but I suspected. 6 months ago, maybe more. The world tilted. She had been at our house for Christmas, a week-long visit. On the 3rd day, she had come downstairs in the night for water and found Richard and Sandra in the kitchen. Not doing anything, she was quick to say, just talking. But there was something in how quickly they moved apart when they heard her footsteps. Something in the way Richard didn't quite meet her eyes at breakfast the next morning. She had said nothing. She had told herself she was imagining things. She had told herself she was an old woman who had seen too much betrayal in her lifetime and was now projecting it onto her own family. She had gone back to Enugu. She had pushed it down. I should have told you. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, but I heard it. Yes, I said, you should have. I ended the call. I sat in the car in the compound of the house I shared with my husband, and I thought about how many people had been protecting the wrong person in this story. Benson for 3 months, my mother for 6, and me for however long this had actually been going on, protecting a marriage that one of us had already quietly abandoned. No more. That evening, when Richard came home, I had dinner on the table. I smiled. I asked him about his day. I poured him a drink. I watched him sit at the head of the table and talk about a meeting that had gone well and traffic on the 3rd Mainland Bridge, and something funny one of his colleagues had said. He was a good liar, smooth, untroubled, completely at ease. I had mistaken that ease for contentment, for safety. Now I watched it and understood it for what it was, the effortless performance of a man who had never been caught. After dinner, after the children were in bed, I sat next to him on the sofa and I said very quietly, "How was Abuja?" He looked at me. What? Your last trip to Abuja, you said the client meetings went well. How were they? Something moved behind his eyes. Something fast and instinctive, like a small animal sensing a trap. But Richard was practiced. His face rearranged itself under 1 second. Busy. You know how those trips are. I said. Which hotel did you stay at this time? A pause. Not long, but long enough. The usual. Why? Which one is the usual one? He looked at me steadily. Transcorp. Chisom, what is this? Just asking, I said. I smiled at him. I was thinking of surprising you on one of your next trips, getting a babysitter and flying up. Would you like that? He said yes. He would love that. He put his hand over mine and said he had been feeling the distance between us lately and a trip together would be wonderful. I smiled. Inside my chest, something that had once been love was turning into something else entirely. Something cold and deliberate and absolutely certain. I had a plan.
I called Sandra the next morning. My voice was light, casual. The voice of a sister who suspected nothing. I miss you, I said. Where have you been? I sent Benson to your flat last week and you went there. She laughed. That bright, ringing Sandra laugh that I had once loved. I know. I was out. I forgot you were sending him. Sorry, Chi. Are you free this weekend? I asked. Come on, stay with us. Spend Saturday night. Richard will be home. It will be like old times. A tiny hesitation. Barely a breath. Then, sure, that sounds nice. Perfect, I said. Come Saturday afternoon. I'm making egusi soup. She said she would be there. I ended the call and picked up my phone again. I called Auntie Ngozi and told her to come too. I called my mother and told her to take the bus from Enugu, not to worry about the cost. I would handle it. I told them both, come quietly. Come Saturday morning.
Be in the house before Sandra arrives. Then I did one final thing. I called my lawyer, a woman I had known since university, a fierce, meticulous woman named Mrs. Daike. I told her I needed to understand, in precise legal terms, what my options were, what I owned, what was jointly held, what I could protect before the storm arrived. Mrs. Daike told me everything I needed to know. Saturday came. My mother arrived Friday night, quietly, tired from the journey, her eyes carrying the weight of a woman who knew she owed her daughter an apology she did not yet know how to give. Auntie Ngozi came Saturday morning, bringing Puff Puff and the sharp, steady energy she always brought into a room. Richard was home. He was pleasant, relaxed, unsuspecting. He greeted my mother warmly, hugged Auntie Ngozi, asked what the occasion was. I told him I had just wanted family around. He seemed pleased. Sandra arrived at 2:30. She came through the door in a cream blouse and wide-leg trousers, her smile enormous, her perfume filling the room before she did. She hugged me first, a long, squeezing hug, the kind that said, "I've missed you." And I hugged her back and thought, I know everything. She hugged my mother. She hugged Auntie Ngozi. She smiled at Richard from across the room and said, "Oga Richard, how now?" And he said, "Sandra, you look well." And there was nothing in either of their voices, nothing, except the extraordinary control of two people who had been practicing this exact performance for months. We ate, we laughed. The children ran around and Sandra chased them and scooped them up and they screamed with delight. My mother was quiet in her corner, watching. Auntie Ngozi was louder than usual, filling space, keeping the atmosphere buoyant. Everything on the surface was warm and ordinary. And then, when the plates were cleared and the children had been sent upstairs, and we were all seated in the living room with tea and the last of the puff puff, I set it down. I took out my phone, I placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room, screen up so that everyone could see, and I played the voice note I had recorded from my call with Titi, Richard's PA. Mr. Richard has not traveled to Abuja in the last 2 months. Silence. Then I looked at Richard. Then I looked at Sandra. Then I looked at them both together and I said very calmly, I would like someone to explain this to me. What followed was not clean. It was not neat or cinematic or dignified. It was a living room of people who loved each other or had once loved each other, coming apart in real time. Richard went first. He reached for denial immediately, reflexively. The voice note was taken out of context. Titi was confused about the dates. There had been a miscommunication. His voice was controlled at first, then less so, then cracking at the edges as he looked around the room and understood, from the expression of my mother's face, from Auntie Ngozi's stillness, from the way I was watching him, that the walls had already closed. Sandra said nothing for a long time. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor, and I watched something move across her face. Shame, maybe, or calculation. With Sandra, it was always hard to tell the difference. It was my mother who broke the silence. She looked at Sandra, her younger daughter, the one she had worried about for most of her life, and she said in Igbo, very quietly, "How long?" Sandra flinched. "How long?" my mother said again. And Sandra, to her credit, or maybe just because there was no exit left, told the truth. 8 months. It had started 8 months ago at a work event Richard had invited her to when I was traveling and couldn't attend. 1 night became 2. 2 became a pattern. A secret that grew so large it had started to feel like, she said, her voice breaking now, genuine tears falling. It had started to feel like a real thing, like something she could not stop even when she wanted to. "Did you want to stop?" Auntie Ngozi asked. Her voice was flat and precise. Sandra wiped her face. "I don't know." "Did you ever once think about your sister?" Sandra looked at me for the first time since I had put the phone on the table. Her eyes were red, her beautiful face undone. "Every day, Chi. Every single day," she whispered. I hated myself. "Don't," I said. It came out very quietly, Do not tell me how much you suffered." She closed her mouth. I looked at Richard. He had stopped defending himself. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, his head bowed, and he looked for the first time in our marriage, maybe, genuinely small. 8 months, I said to him. He did not lift his head. 8 months of trips that were not trips. 8 months of phone calls from hotel rooms that were 20 minutes away. 8 months of looking me in the face. I paused. With my sister. He looked up then. His eyes were wet. "Chisom, don't," I said. Same quiet voice, same absolute stillness. "I don't want to hear it tonight. Tonight, I want you to take a bag and go wherever you are actually going on those trips. And I want you gone before my children wake up tomorrow." "Chisom, please." "Benson will take you, or you can call a taxi. But you are leaving this house tonight." He left. Sandra tried to follow him with her eyes, then caught herself. She looked at me. Whatever she was about to say, apology, explanation, plea, died in her throat when she saw my expression. "You should go too," I said. "My mother will stay. You should go." She stood slowly. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. And then, at the door, she turned around one last time, and I want to be honest with you about what I saw on her face, because it matters. It was not defiance. It was not even guilt anymore. It was grief. The kind of grief that belongs to someone who has destroyed something they cannot rebuild. The kind that sits in the chest and does not move for years. I understood it. I did not soften because of it. "Sandra," I said. She stopped. "The children loved you. My children called you Auntie Sandra and ran to you at the door. Whatever you decide to do with the rest of your life, I want you to sit with that. Every time you make a choice, sit with that." She did not answer. She walked out. She went.
The house was quiet after that. My mother sat with me until very late, holding my hand without speaking. Auntie Ngozi made tea she knew neither of us would drink and sat on the other side of me, a small, solid wall of presence. I did not cry that night. I think people expected me to. My mother kept looking at me sideways, braced for the breakdown. Even Auntie Ngozi, who was not a woman easily unnerved, watched me with something cautious in her eyes. But the tears did not come, not that night. What came instead was clarity. A terrifying, almost luminous clarity, the kind that arrives when the fog you have been living in finally lifts and you see the landscape for the first time. And what I saw was this. I had not been blind. I had not been stupid. I had simply been trusting. And trust, when it is placed in the wrong hands, can look exactly like foolishness from the outside, even when it is in fact the most human thing a person can do. I sat in my living room in my house, and I decided quietly and without drama that I was not going to let this break me. I was going to let it change me. There is a difference. Being broken means losing yourself. Being changed means finding a sharper, truer version of who you always were. I chose change. At some point, Benson knocked at the back door. I called out for him to come in. He stood at the threshold again. The same threshold as Monday, the same cap in his hands, the same weight behind his eyes. "Is everything all right, Ma?" he said. I looked at this man who had carried a secret for 3 months, who had lost sleep over someone else's marriage, who had chosen, at great personal cost, to tell the truth. "Everything will be all right," I said. "Thank you, Benson, for telling me." He nodded. He looked like he might say something else, then decided against it. "Go home to your family," I said. "Go and sleep." He nodded again. "Yes, Ma. Good night, Ma." He left. Now, I want to tell you what happened in the weeks and months that followed, because this is where the story stops being just about betrayal and starts being about something else, about what a woman is made of when everything she built has been dismantled. The first week was the hardest, not because of Richard. I had made my peace with Richard the moment I sat at that kitchen table after Benson told me the truth. The hardest part was the children, telling them that Daddy was not going to be living at home for a while.
watching my 7-year-old son look at me with those enormous, trusting eyes and ask if it was because he had been naughty. Holding him and telling him over and over that it had nothing to do with him, nothing, that Daddy loved him and I loved him, and that some things between grown-ups were complicated, but none of it was his fault. Those conversations were the ones that cost me the most. My daughter, who was 10 and sharper than her age, said very little. She watched everything. She processed quietly, the way I had always processed. And about 2 weeks after Richard left, she came to me in the kitchen while I was washing dishes and stood beside me and said, "Mommy, I think I know." I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. I said, "What do you think you know?" And she said that it was something about Auntie Sandra. I looked at her for a long moment and then I said, "You are very clever." She nodded. She picked up a dish and started drying it alongside me, and we finished the dishes together without saying anything else, and somehow that was enough. The divorce was not easy. Richard fought it at first, not out of love, I think, but out of the particular fear men have when they realize they are about to lose something they took for granted. He hired a lawyer. I had already hired mine. Mrs. Dike was, as promised, meticulous and fierce, and the process, though painful, moved with a clarity and purpose that surprised even me. I kept the house. The children stayed with me. Richard paid what he was legally required to pay, and then moved into a flat in Lekki, not with Sandra, as it turned out. Whatever they had in those hotel rooms apparently did not survive the exposure to daylight. Sandra went quiet for months. She stopped calling, she stopped appearing. I heard from a cousin that she had moved to Abuja for work, which struck me as either coincidence or irony so thick you could choke on it. My mother came back to Lagos and stayed for 6 weeks after that Saturday. She was different with me during those weeks, quieter, more careful, as though she was learning a new language for how to be a mother to the daughter she had almost failed. We had the conversation, eventually, the hard one about Christmas, about what she had seen and not said. It was not easy. There were tears and some anger, and the particular grief of realizing that even the people who love you most can choose silence to protect themselves. But we got through it, because that is what you do with people who love you imperfectly. You grieve what you wish they had done, and then, if you can, you choose to stay. Auntie Ngozi was there every step of the way. She showed up on weekdays with food I had not asked for and opinions I had not requested, and she filled the house with the kind of loud, unself-conscious love that makes it possible to get out of bed in the morning. Benson stayed. Of course he stayed. I gave him a raise that he tried to refuse, and I refused to let him refuse it. He still drives the children to school. He still pulls the car around without being asked. He still has that quiet, steady way of being present that I now understand is one of the rarest gifts a person can offer. Here is what I want you to take from this story, because I've been telling it for a reason, and the reason is not just the drama, not just the betrayal, not just the unraveling. The reason is Benson. In a story full of people who chose silence, who saw something and said nothing, who let a woman walk in the dark because speaking up felt too costly, Benson was the one who finally spoke. He was the lowest ranked person in that house, he had the most to lose and the least power to protect himself, and he spoke anyway. I have thought about this often. I have thought about what it cost him, the 3 months of sleepless nights, the rehearsed conversations, the fear of losing his job, his stability. I have thought about what it would have looked like if he had stayed silent, if he had driven past that hotel and told himself it was not his business, if he had chosen, as so many people do, the comfort of looking away. I would still be in that marriage. I would still be packing Richard's suitcase and kissing him goodbye at the door and telling myself the uneasy feeling in my chest was just anxiety, just paranoia, just the irrational fear of a woman who had not learned to trust. Benson gave me my life back. Not a driver, not a staff, a man who understood, even without the language to explain it, that truth is not just a personal value, it's something you owe the people who are counting on the world around them to be honest. We talk a lot about the people who betray us, the husbands, the sisters, the ones who look us in the eye while lying. But we don't talk enough about the Bensons, the quiet ones standing in the background, wrestling with what they know, calculating the cost of truth, the ones who carry other people's secrets until the weight becomes unbearable. The next time someone tells you the truth at great personal cost, stop. Really stop, because what they are doing is extraordinarily difficult. What they are giving you is not just information, it's proof that they value your dignity over their own safety. That's rare. That's worth more than most things. And here's the other thing I want to say. To anyone watching this who might be standing where Benson stood, who knows something, who is carrying something, who has been telling themselves it is not their place, it is not their business, it is not their problem to solve. It is not your job to fix everything. But silence, when you know the truth, has weight. It lands somewhere. It lands on the person you are protecting by staying quiet, and it lands on the person you are leaving in the dark. If you care about someone truly, care about them. Sometimes caring looks like a difficult conversation. Sometimes it looks like showing up at the back door with your cap in your hands and saying the thing you've been afraid to say. Don't wait 3 months. Don't wait 6. Speak sooner.
I am not the same woman who kissed her husband goodbye on that ordinary Tuesday morning. I am harder in some places and softer in others. I laugh differently, less automatically, more genuinely. I notice things I used to walk past. I ask more questions. I trust more slowly, which some people would call damage, and I have decided to call wisdom. My children are good. They are confused sometimes, the way children are when their world rearranges itself. But they are surrounded by love. Mine, their grandmothers, Auntie Ngozi's loud and irrepressible version, even Benson's quiet, steady kind. They will be all right. We will be all right. Sandra reached out 11 months later. A long message, careful and raw, the kind of message someone writes and deletes and rewrites many times before sending. She did not make excuses. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she had been in therapy. She said she was ashamed, genuinely bone deep ashamed, in a way she had never been ashamed of anything in her life. She said she did not expect a response. I have not responded yet. I am not sure I will. There is a version of this story where I forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine, because carrying hatred is heavy and I have already carried enough. That version is possible. I can see the shape of it from where I stand. But I am not there yet, and that is allowed. Healing is not a performance. You do not have to rush toward the ending that sounds good. You are allowed to take exactly as long as you need. Richard remarried 18 months later. I heard this through our children who went to see him on weekends and came back with pieces of information I had not asked for. I felt, surprisingly, and then not so surprisingly, almost nothing. The nothing was not emptiness, it was completion, the closing of something that had already been over for a long time. I took the children on holiday to Zanzibar that same month. We swam in warm water and ate seafood and watched the sun go down over the Indian Ocean. And my daughter put her head on my shoulder and said, "Mommy, I like it when it's just us." I held her close and thought, "Me too, baby, me too." If you have made it to the end of this story, thank you. Not just for watching, but for staying. Stories like this one are heavy. They carry real weight. And the fact that you sat with this woman's truth all the way to the end means something. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, if it made you think about the people you trust and the silence you might be keeping, please subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, though it does, but because stories like this one deserve to be heard. The Chisoms of this world deserve to be believed. The Bensons deserve to be celebrated. And the truth, the hard, costly relationship-ending truth, deserves to be spoken. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And take care of the people in your life who take care of you. Until next time.